Hello, everyone, and welcome to our fourth webinar series, part of our series, or our fourth week, depending on how you're watching this video. So we are in our fourth webinar, or our week of support for caregivers and parents of bereaved children. So this week we are going to be talking about understanding and communicating with your child. So just a little bit about who we are. So my name is Kayla Slegers, and I'm the Supportive Services Coordinator at St. Joseph's Hospice.
And hello, my name is Orly Culverhouse, and I'm the Caring Hearts Children's Program Coordinator and Music Therapist at St. Joseph's Hospice.
So we're just going to go over a little bit of an agenda for today. So we are going to start with just some housekeeping items. We're going to talk about ways to support your child and understanding your child. And some tips for recognizing their grief responses and what to expect. A child's interpretation of death. So we're going to touch upon the 5 C's, communication strategies with your child, and language to use when explaining death and dying. Modeling of grief responses and ways to manage challenging behaviors. And lastly, we'll talk about teachable moments and ways to continue these with your child at home. So as I mentioned, this is our fourth webinar of our 5-part series. So you may have already watched 3 of these webinars. Maybe you're not watching them in order, and that's okay too. So typically we would offer this group in person at St. Joseph's Hospice alongside our children's groups. So we have a 6 to 9 group and a 10 to 13 or 10 to 12, 13 age group that run at the hospice, and we would run this group at the same time for parents and caregivers to learn more about supporting their child, and our themes kind of match up what those children are learning in their group. However, our groups right now at hospice are on hold because we are in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we thought this would be a great idea to record these right now to be able to resource our caregivers in the community and post them on our YouTube page. So if you are receiving these webinars via email, you will notice that we will be sending them out one at a time, and there may be some attachments and some handouts with those webinars. However, we are also, like I said, going to post this on our YouTube page on St. Joseph's channel. So you may be accessing these on your own time. So if you don't have access to these handouts or resources, please feel free to email one of us if you have any questions or you would like to get access to these handouts. And our email is posted here on our page. So it's supportiveservices@sjhospice.ca. So like I said, if you're welcome to watch all 5 of these series, or maybe you're just watching ones that are more applicable to you. But we are in part 5, and we have 1 more to go.
We talked about, I think, the 5 C's in week 2. So we're just gonna do a quick flashback. So we talked about 5 C's are what children, kind of those first few things that children think about when they find out that a loved one has died or is dying. So yeah, we won't spend too much time here because we have already gone over it. But it's an easy thing to remember. And when I'm working with kids, I usually am having the 5 C's in the back of my mind. And I almost view them as a little bit of a checklist when I'm working with a child, especially when I'm meeting them for the first time. So the first C is, did I cause it? So we know, especially with younger children, because of this, this wonderful thing called magical thinking, which is one of the greatest things about being a kid. It's about playing make-believe and creative play and huge imagination, but it doesn't help them necessarily in situations with death and dying, because it's the idea that my internal world, my thoughts and my feelings can have real world implications. That's that magical thinking. And so often kids might think that because I got really mad at my person and I told them to go away that one day, or I had a bad thought about that person, or I said something really mean, and then they find out the person has died. Often kids will think it's probably I had something to do with it. My actions, my feelings have caused it in some way. And so it's a pretty easy conversation to have with kids, because I'll say, did you know that nothing that we say or think can make a person's body die? Or we might, when I'm talking about grief with kids, I might talk about guilty. Like, does grief ever feel guilty for you? So it's good. It's good for us to keep that in mind. I think kids often kind of internalize that and will think maybe it's because I'm a bad kid that so-and-so died. The next one is, can I catch it? So that talks about, when we're talking about can I catch it, it depends on if the person maybe is ill and dying and has an illness. We often talk about with kids, you know, germs and washing your hands and getting sick. And that's why it's really, really important. We'll talk about language in a bit, but it's really important for us to make sure that we use the real name and not just say so-and-so is sick. It would be so-and-so has cancer, or so-and-so has Alzheimer's disease or ALS or whatever it is, because we want to make sure that there's no confusion about the flu, for example, which is very, you know, transmissible, or like COVID-19, for example, which is something that you can catch, versus cancer, which we know you can't catch. I remember there was a situation of, I got a call to support a family in our residence at St. Joseph's Hospice, and there were two little boys. I think they were probably age 8 and 11. And mom was beside herself because these boys, it was kind of like they had brought the boys in to come and say goodbye to the person who was dying in our residence, and the boys didn't want to go in and see the person. And so then the mom is freaking out a little bit, trying to think about, you know, I don't want to force them to go in, but if they don't have the opportunity to say goodbye to their person, like what are those implications going to be like? But I also don't want to drag them into the room and scare them, kind of thing. And so I had a conversation with these, they were, you know, sitting in our common area on their iPads. And I said, you know, it seems like your mom says you don't want to go in and see so-and-so, you know, like what's going on there? And they said, well, we don't want to catch cancer. And it was like, okay. So that's an easy fix in that moment, because I can say, you know what, even if so-and-so sneezed in your mouth, I can promise you that you're not going to get cancer. That's not like the way that we get cancer. Cancer starts in our cells. The other way that kids might think about, can I catch it? There's often a really big concern about someone else dying after a loved one has died, especially if it's a caregiver loss or like a parent loss. Children are very, very concerned about the well-being of the surviving parent, and they just think about a lot if it means that person is going to die too. And so again, we wouldn't lie to the child and say things like, I'm never going to die, or that's not going to happen, or because really we don't know. But what I usually will say to kids is that it's very unlikely that another person in your life or another parent in your life would die. It's not impossible, but very unlikely. And I find that kids usually, that's an acceptable answer. Can I cure it? Kind of links back to this magical thinking thing, where if I believe that my actions maybe caused someone to die, maybe my actions can make them not be dead anymore or not be sick anymore. So we have to kind of talk with kids about, like, it doesn't matter how well you behave. It doesn't matter if you make the basketball team or if you get really good marks. We can't make a person's body not be dead anymore, or we can't get rid of someone's illness by behaving really well. Who will care for me? I think that, again, we see this all the time, but especially when there's been a loss of a parent, kids are just wanting to know that their needs are going to be met. Maybe they don't verbalize it in that way, but I think that when, and we can identify with this as adults too, when we have a loved one who has died, our whole world is turned upside down. It's not safe anymore. And so kids need consistent, available adults who are going to be there for them, and who are going to make sure that their needs are being met. And so it might be having the conversation that says, you know, I know that so-and-so has died, but, and maybe if you're a grieving parent, you might say, and I'm very upset, like I'm grieving too, and I'm sad, or I'm angry, or, but I am still going to make sure that your needs are going to be met. And you don't just have me, you have, you know, maybe it's grandma and grandpa, or you have you have your teachers at school, and you have all of these people who are going to make sure that you are taken care of at the end of the day. So it's just, I think, reassuring children of that. And then how will we stay connected, which is the newest C. So when I started in this work years ago, it was the 3 C's, and then we added the 4th C, and now there's 5 C's, which is like the most recent one, which is how will we stay connected. So I think with kids wanting to maintain connection with either the person who's ill, and maybe that's as they transition from home to hospital or hospice. So how can we kind of maintain that relationship with the child despite the person's condition changing, their location changing, that kind of thing. But also, once a person has died, how do we continue that relationship with them? And how do we support our kids and our youth in also continuing that relationship? So we talked a lot in the last session about continuing bonds and memorialization and rituals. And so that's kind of where that piece comes in. And so if you want to learn more about that, you can check out that module.
Great. So next I'm just going to read a little quote here to I think this quote really kind of summarizes a lot of what we just talked about really nicely. So it's the responsibility of adults to take the lead in open conversations about dying and death with kids. Then take the child's lead in the conversation about talking about the death, the person, the situation, and how much detail they want to know. So I think when we're thinking about taking that lead and what to share with the child and when is the appropriate time, it's not is there an appropriate time, or should I talk about it? It's you should, but taking the child's lead and considering a lot of those temperament traits or responses that your child has had that maybe you've already noticed recently or in past situations. And then when you're thinking about that conversation and what to tell the child, answering their questions, allowing them to ask questions, but also thinking about those 5 C's. And those are really important pieces that you can go over with your child if you're wondering about where to start and what to go over. And again, depending on your child's, openness or how curious they are or how sensitive, that their questions will help you guide that conversation, what to tell them and how much detail. So we know that we probably aren't going to give a 3-year-old as much detail as a 13-year-old. But depending on their questions, if you have 2 kids that are 3 and 4, they might want to know very different information or have very different questions, all depending on that child. So sometimes it's also good to have separate conversations with your kids if they're at different ages, or if you know that your children are very different. You can always start with a family conversation and then break that up depending. Or as we've mentioned before, kids often will know when they've reached their limit or if they've had enough. So if you are having a family conversation with, say, multiple kids at once, and say your 8-year-old asks a question that's maybe just too much detail that the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old or the 10-year-old wants to know, they'll likely remove themselves or just continue on and go play. And just find that that's okay too. So just not forcing that information on any of your kids, but make sure we are reassuring them for being honest and still talking about what has happened, and opening up that conversation, and knowing that you're available and present for that. Okay, so next we're going to talk about some conversation tips. We're hoping that these webinars are very practical to you, so hopefully you find some of these helpful. So the first one is creating an appropriate time and space with minimal disturbances. So like any conversation that, can be sensitive or have tough conversations or bring up a lot of big emotions, it's always important to keep in mind, an appropriate, time within your schedule and your day, as well as how you are doing mindfully, as well as your kids, and as well as a space. So you want to make sure that there's no distractions, such as, the dinner's gonna be ready in 5 minutes, or that your phones are on silent, making sure that, it's not your kid just got home from school and they had a really tough day. You don't wanna bring up, this news now that someone has died, or talking about, big feelings that you've noticed, and making sure for you too that you are in a good headspace to be present, and just being mindful of all those things. So just like adults, we want to make sure that it's an appropriate time and place to have big conversations with kids too, right? We don't want to catch them if they're having a bad day or throw them for a loop. So getting on your child's level. So if they're laying in bed, get in bed with them. If they're sitting on the ground, sit on the ground with them. Sit at an eye level so they really feel heard and understood. And that's you can approach the situation in ways that they can understand and with different outlets. So exploring the child and youth's understanding of the situation. So I know in my work with children, and I know Orly does this often, whenever we're opening up this conversation about death, they're dying, or an illness, always leading with, well, what do you know about so-and-so's illness? Or what does cancer mean to you? Or what does that mean if someone has died? So we're always gauging what the child or youth's understanding is of it first. That way you can, reiterate or build on what they already know in the language that they understand. And using words that they understand, or if there, is misconceptions, or, maybe they've done some magical thinking and they have, false information, or have created some idea in their head about what something means, you can then correct that, or unpack that and give them the right information or the right wording and explanations of what something may mean. So this also helps you to gauge, what they already know. This also kind of follows that, taking their lead in that conversation and just building on that. So encouraging your children to ask questions and share worries and share big feelings. Especially this comes back to too, if you, depending on your child, you don't want to push them too much and, force them to start conversations or ask questions, but just letting them know that you're always there to, be there to explore what they're wondering together. And providing an outlet of expressions. So again, we talked about this, I think, in week 2, but providing lots of opportunity to explain certain conversations or topics as well. So as well as with their expression. So maybe it's using books or play or figurines to talk about topics and to explore what their child's understanding is. Different, play opportunities with kids. And explaining things and allowing them to explain what they know is really helpful at their level. And it's comforting for them to talk about things or, process certain topics in an outlet that they're comfortable with and that they, enjoy. Acknowledge your child's feelings without correcting or trying to change the feeling. So we're going to talk about this a little bit more when we're talking about communication, but really what we want to hone in here is let your child express what they're feeling, help them to, give them, help them with emotional literacy. So giving them, being able to name what they're feeling without trying to, judge what's coming up for them or correct what they're feeling. So there's no right or wrong way to feel when you are grieving or to feel about, someone being ill, letting them know that whatever they're feeling is okay. Letting them know what you're feeling and maybe relating to them and normalizing what they're feeling and just acknowledging it. So not trying to change it or fix it or cover it up, allowing them to feel what they're feeling and helping them to give them those tools to express, acknowledge what that feeling might be. So naming it if it's sadness or I'm hearing that you're angry and helping them explain what they're feeling. So it's more conversation tips. So being honest if you don't know the answer. So when we're exploring things like death and dying, we might not always have those answers. And kids can ask some pretty, out there questions. They can ask anything. They have very creative minds. And sometimes we might just not have the answers, and that's okay. Or maybe right there in that moment, you don't feel prepared or, ready to give them, certain answers, not because you want to protect them, but maybe because you're just not sure. So letting them know, that's a really great question. Can we come back to this, or can we talk about this later or tomorrow? Or, it's a really great question. Why don't we ask the doctor that? Or why don't we look it up together if that may be appropriate? And, jumping on Google if it's, with a little bit of limits, but jumping on Google or, finding a way to explore their questions together and finding those answers, again, depending on the child's age. But your child may also ask questions like, well, what happens in heaven? Or what does it mean when someone after they died? Those are questions we might not have those answers for, and that's okay. So, wondering together, throwing it back on them again. Well, what do you think about that? Or what does that mean to you? Or sharing them with what you think that may be. This is a great way to explore our beliefs about things. And just knowing that there's not always that perfect answer, although there always isn't a correct answer either. Providing age-appropriate responses. So like we said, using books, pictures, videos, or other materials to help explain things to children. So we're going to use some YouTube videos today that are really great. We're going to make some recommendations on books and some websites later on. So these are all great ways to help explain things, especially if you're not feeling, so sure or so confident about how to explain things. There's so many great tools out there to help you, and it's more comfortable for children too, and it normalizes a little bit more when they're not the only ones going through this when you're relating it back to maybe a character in a movie or, other kids talking about something on YouTube, whatever it may be. So avoid sugarcoating or deflecting difficult conversations. So this comes back to just that honest piece, and making that time and space for these conversations, even if that means they are tough. So we don't want to, mask or, sugarcoat that information if that's what they want to know. So, if your child is asking a question, you're wondering, oh, this sounds like a lot of detail, or I'm not really sure how they're going to take this. Start slowly, give them honest information, and take their lead in how much detail they want to know. Or reflect back on them. How was that for you? Or how are you feeling now that you know that? Or do you have any other questions about that? Again, just checking in on them often. And when it comes to deflecting those difficult conversations, just coming back to that proper time and space. And maybe offering more support to you. So maybe you're having these conversations, with your spouse, or maybe it's the teacher, or maybe even the doctor. So that it's a supportive conversation, and you're not feeling, that worry if you're not sure about how to approach a conversation. Letting your child know that they are loved, they're safe, and they're taken care of. So back to that reassurance piece, letting them know that, they're not going to catch cancer. They're safe right now. You don't have cancer. You're here with them. You're not making those false promises again, like Orly had mentioned about not saying, no, I'm never going to die, but letting them know that you are here to take care of them, or reminding them and reassuring them of the support that they have in their lives, of routine, and just really, nurturing them. So this comes back to, or we can go to our next point in that wraparound support system. So communicate with other caregivers in your child's or children's life about what has happened about this death. So maybe it's their teachers, coaches, friends, parents, informing them so that they can also support your child, and letting your kids know about who that support system is, letting them know that, if you're having big worries or big fears, or if you have questions at school, it's okay to talk to your teacher, or it's okay to ask questions of people that you love and you trust. So maybe it's your friend's parents, or, at soccer practice. Just giving them that whole wraparound support. So that anytime throughout their day, they know that they can express their concerns or their questions, and that it's not such a taboo thing to talk about, and so normalizing it. So, and making time for your child every single day. So I know that many of you, probably do this, but making time for your day, making time every day for your child, and maybe it's, every day after dinner, or every morning before they go to school, or just before bed. If you can structure it into your routine or your child's routine, this also is really helpful and comforting for children, and making this time with them, giving them your undivided attention, and maybe giving them a little bit of that choice and freedom of what you guys do at that time, taking their lead. Maybe it's a snuggling, maybe it's crying together, maybe it's watching YouTube together, reading a book, looking at pictures of your loved one, whatever it may be, but taking that 5 minutes or that hour, whatever you can with your child, and, uninterrupted space. It can really go a long way and help your kids really feel that love and that presence, and that you're there no matter what. So, okay, I'm gonna pass this on to Orly.
Thank you. Okay, so kind of continuing on the theme of communication, we like to also talk about kind of where communication can kind of come off the rails a little bit, or just these typical roadblocks that will come up sometimes when parents or caregivers are having these conversations with kids. And really, I would say that these could also be considered roadblocks to support. And that we can probably even think of it more, not just with kids, but if you're supporting a grieving person in general. These are the things that can get in the way. So the first one is the Fixit Trap. This is so common. We hear about it all the time. And this idea that I think it was for children, we don't want our kids to feel pain. We want to protect them. We don't want them to go through negative experiences. And so often when we're having these conversations about someone dying or about someone being ill, a lot of big feelings are going to come up, right? We would expect that to happen. And I think if we're supporting a grieving person, there's often a lot of big emotions, big expressions kind of thing. And usually this Fixit Trap speaks to our discomfort with sitting with those big emotions. And then also it comes from that place of not wanting our kids to feel pain. And so what we'll do is we might jump to trying to fix a situation. So, you know, you might be saying things like, I know that you're really disappointed about whatever happening, but you know, we're gonna treasure every day that we have with so and so, and like those kind of platitudes that we will sometimes throw on people, or just all of those things are attempts to kind of fix those big emotions. Or, you know, sometimes with kids, I find we often we'll try to distract them out of their big emotions. So do you want to go play a game, or do you want to go watch a movie? Or, and so just really as much as possible, and it's not always easy to do, resist that urge to bypass those big feelings, because unfortunately what we're then modeling for our kids is that big feelings are not okay, and that we are uncomfortable with them, and so kids should be uncomfortable with them too. And so what we really want to teach our kids is that you can experience really big feelings, you can feel really big feelings, and still be okay at the end of them. Kind of giving them that confidence and that resilience to be able to experience their grief, and still that they'll still be okay, right? Advising, giving solutions. So again, we see this not just with kids, but with the grieving people. So it might be saying, you know, you just need to exercise more. You just need to get out and get dating again. Or for kids, it might be, I'm trying to think of what like advice we might give kids when they're having these really big, and then I think we have to also think about when a child is having a really big feeling, they're probably not hearing our advice or our solutions. And it's really, really powerful when a child is able to come up with their own solution, right? So if we have a child who's really struggling with, I'm having trouble, Kayla, coming up with examples. I don't know if you can think of any.
Yeah, well, one example, you know, if your child's crying and you want to stop that crying, this overlaps a little bit with the Fixit Trap, but you know, stop crying. It's going to be okay. You know, you get to go see so-and-so today. So trying to give them that solution, or distract them, or, you know, just to stop that and advise them to, or if they're crying, you know, it's okay. You don't need to cry. You don't need to cry. Be happy. You know, be happy that you had that time together with them. That's, again, switching that conversation rather than letting them just cry, right? Or be
Absolutely.
upset.
Yeah. And I guess really all of these roadblocks to communication, or maybe even support, all of them, I think in some way or another are bypassing that really big feeling, right? We're trying to, to skip the part where the child is upset and get right on to, you know, the next thing, right? So yeah, advising, giving solutions. Next one we talk about is praising. Absolutely, we need to praise our children. I'm not saying that we should not be praising our children, but we just want to be really conscious about what behavior that we're reinforcing and what behavior that we're praising. A lot of bereaved people will tell us that they hear things like, oh my gosh, you're so brave and you're so strong. And it kind of, it can shut down that conversation in the sense of making the bereaved person feel like they're not able to share those feelings because they're supposed to be strong and brave. And so we just want to be really mindful of what kind of, what messages we're giving our children about what does it mean to be brave and strong, right? So we could talk about that. It's really brave to be vulnerable and to experience our feelings and to express our grief. And so we just want to be really mindful about, and then again, not saying those things in response to big feelings, right? Because I think it's like we're trying to then praise our children out of whatever they're experiencing instead of just sitting with it and just being okay with there being tears or with there being those big feelings, and not feeling the need to kind of jump in and praise them or to respond with something that's going to bypass the feeling, if that makes sense. And then reassuring. So we talk a lot about, or we have talked a lot about today about reassurance. And I think that again, we absolutely want to be reassuring our children, but we just want to be doing so in a way that is truthful. So one of the things that we know about kids is that a huge factor in resilience is trust, and children being able to trust their caregivers, parents, the adults in their lives. And so we don't want to give false reassurances. So again, that idea of like, well, mommy's never going to die, or so-and-so is never going to get sick, or that's never going to happen. That's not really true. We can't actually say that, so-and-so is never going to die, but you can reassure In other ways, like, you know what, I don't have all the answers right now, but I promise you, if there's an update about so-and-so's health, that I'm going to be letting you know, or that if I do get more information, I'm going to be coming to you with that. And or reassuring, you know what, I don't have all the answers right now, but I promise, like, I'm not going to be untruthful with you. If you ask questions, I'm going to do my best to answer them, and if I can't, then I'll let you know. So there's a difference there between that'll never happen, or everything's going to be fine, and kind of that honest reassurance, if that makes sense. And that it helps the children know that they can trust you. And I think that it can take a lot of anxiety out of the situation for kids. So maybe it is really scary and we don't have all the answers, but it can kind of make the child feel more reassured if it's like, well, these adults who are always supposed to have all of the answers actually don't know what's going on either. So it can kind of take that anxiety out. And then also it reassures them that if anything changes, someone is going to let them know. So yeah, if that makes sense.
Or like, just to add to that too, with reassuring, reassuring them and also normalizing some of those big feelings that they're having, or those big concerns or worries or questions, if you have them too, or let the kids know, I worry about that too, or I wonder, or, I feel really sad too. Like, we can be sad together, right? So rather than trying to take that away, or if you're a professional listening here, sometimes I like to say too, or I know you use this a lot too, is, other kids often tell me that they feel sad too, or a lot of kids ask that question. So just reassuring them that they're not alone in what they're feeling either, then it's normal. So the normalcy piece.
Absolutely. And then again, it goes to that modeling piece, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but that idea that as adults, we're then modeling that it's okay to share your feelings. And then if your child can then observe you maybe using a really good coping strategy on how you're going to deal with those big feelings, then that's like perfect, right? That's like the goal. That's like what we're all aspiring to, kind of thing. It doesn't happen all the time, as we all know, but that's great, modeling those behaviors. So we have kind of a case study for you that I'm going to read. So 4-year-old Chrissy ran through the front door, slamming it so forcefully that the pictures rattled on the wall, and promptly burst into tears. "Tammy took my ball," she wailed. "I hate her." Then Chrissy threw herself onto the sofa in a storm of sobs. Her mom, Diane, looked up from the bills she was paying. Resisting the impulse to scold Chrissy for slamming the door, she said quietly, "You seem pretty angry, kiddo." Chrissy pondered that for a moment. "Mom," she said plaintively, sniffing a little, "Tammy's bigger than me. It isn't fair for her to always take my stuff away." "It must be pretty frustrating to be picked on by a big girl," Diane said, still focusing on reflecting her daughter's feelings. "Yeah, I'm mad," the little girl said firmly. "I don't want to play with her anymore." She sat quietly for a moment, watching as Diane put stamps on envelopes. "Mom, can I go play out in the backyard?" Diane gave her daughter a hug, and a great deal more.
Next, we're going to watch a little video that will also kind of demonstrate some of this active listening and communicating and conversation tips. And it's a video from a movie called Inside Out that I hope that many of you recognize. It's a wonderful movie. We encourage you all to watch the whole thing, but we're just going to watch a short clip today.
Oh, the stuffed animal Hall of Fame! My rocket! Wait, Granny and I were still using that rocket. It still has some salt power left. Who is your friend who likes to play? No, you can't take my rocket for that. Granny and I go to the moon. Granny can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone. Forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time, we had breakfast twice that day.
Sadness.
It sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did. We were best friends.
Yeah, it's sad.
I'm okay now. Come on. The train station is this way.
How did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what...
Hey! There's the train!
I just love that video. I just like, oh, it's so good.
It is. So yeah, you may have noticed, lots of things between sadness and happy, or joy is her name, the characters. So, is it Bing Bong, Arlie?
Yeah.
Bing Bong, was so upset about he lost something, right? So this video just it's not necessarily about death, but it's about grief and that loss of an object that was important to him. And he was really sad, and happiness tried to jump in and tried to fix it. She wanted to distract Bing Bong. She didn't meet him where he was at all, right? And then sadness came in, and he acknowledged what Bing Bong was feeling. He validated his feelings. He created a safe and loving space for him to, share his stories, to express what feelings were coming up for him. He rephrased what he had heard, and he just supported him in the space that he needed, and loved and listened. And then again, very similar to the story, the case that we talked about, Bing Bong, like Chrissy, was able to, then regulate and then, come up with that solution and move on to the next without having to, fix it or come up with a solution for him. So
it's a great example, I think, when a child is having those really big emotions, it can feel for us like anxiety provoking, and we think, oh my gosh, like what do I do? But if we can just sit with it and validate, and usually the child, if we just wait, the child will move on to the next thing, right? And so it really shows that well, if you can kind of take a deep breath and really try to ride out that wave with the child, they'll move on to the next thing on their own, right? And I think if you've seen Inside Out, it's so interesting, because I think we definitely as a society, we view certain emotions as good and bad, right? Positive emotions like joy are the kind of desired ones, and we always want to be feeling those, and sad and anger are bad emotions. But really have to just kind of think about emotions are emotions, and they're kind of tools that we use. They're things that maybe show us like when we're reacting to different situations. And so throughout the whole movie, everybody kind of, poo-poos on sadness because she's always a bummer and she's such a downer kind of thing, and definitely they always want joy to be kind of front and center. But it shows how we can't always be, it's not realistic for us to always be in those positive emotions, and that sometimes we need sadness and we need anger and we need those commonly what we would refer to as negative emotions in order to kind of have that human experience and to move forward. So it's just an opportunity for us to think about, do I have that belief that maybe I've been carrying around that only positive emotions are good, and we don't want, I'm not comfortable if my kid is experiencing sadness or anger, because they're absolutely normal and needed and necessary. Anyways, we'll talk about modeling healthy grieving. So with kids, I mean, really, when we're trying to do anything with children, I think it's important that we talk about modeling, right? It's just with You want to model the behaviors that you want to see. So, you know, things like we talk about washing our hands or brushing our teeth, or kids really do well when they see those behaviors being modeled for them. And it's not really fair or realistic for us to be expecting children to model behavior that we're not modeling ourselves. And so it's really important as parents and caregivers, as supportive people in children's lives or in youth lives, that we're modeling what healthy grieving is, so that they have something that they're kind of being able to copy and look for, and that kind of thing. We also talk about, so when we're talking about modeling healthy grieving, something that often comes up with children who, bereaved children, especially if it's a parent who has died, is this idea of parentification or role reversals. So it's just something for you to be aware of. We often find that when a parent has died, the children are very, very concerned about the well-being of the surviving parent. There's often those concerns about, well, you know, will they die too? And children become parentified when they start, essentially it's being like exhibiting behaviors like a parent, right? So we might see this with older siblings who are then parenting their younger siblings, feeling like they need to take on more responsibility, you know, for feeling like they need to be a big kid now. We see this a lot with like boys too, like I have to be, or I guess it would be if a boy has lost a father, feeling like they need to be the man of the house. And so it's just something for us as caregivers to be aware of and make sure that we're not playing into that. Because I think society in general probably has this, has these pressures on us that we need to grow up, we need to be big kids now, and so we just want to make sure that we're not also feeding into that as parents. And it might just be talking about how I'm the parent and you're the kid, and your job is to be a kid, and my job is to worry about, you know, whatever those adult concerns are. We've also seen, this is more, I would say, with like preteens, like being really concerned about finances and that kind of thing, and will we have enough money, and so it might just be talking about how, you know, my job as the adult is to worry about those things, and that's not your job as the child to worry about that, and just making sure that, yeah, your job is to be a kid, right, and not to feel like you need to be a parent to your younger siblings or what have you. Another way that we can model healthy grieving is by trying to create a network for you and your children, or your youth, whoever you have, to rely on for care, support, and togetherness. So what we know when somebody dies, it can be very isolating. I think that especially if you are a single parent now, it can be difficult to do all the normal tasks that you were doing with potentially what you were doing with two people, now you're doing with one. And so if you have a network of people who can do even just simple things like picking your kid up from school or taking them to activities, maybe helping out with groceries here and there, or even just people that your child can go to talk, or to be supported by, like maybe it's sleepovers at Nana's house, or friends or teachers or other professionals, just having lots and lots of supportive, consistent adults or supportive and consistent people in the child's life, so that you're not the only one. Kind of, that's a lot of pressure for one person, and just making sure that then there's, yeah, lots of support available for your child. Give your child permission, and also not just like give them permission, but encourage them to continue to play and have fun. And it's absolutely still okay for your child to be a kid and to still experience joy and to still look forward to things like birthday parties or to the holiday season, or it's okay to still feel happy and engage in activities that they enjoy. Kids, I find, for the most part, do this really well. One of the questions that I'll ask when we're talking about grief and what it means, I usually will ask the question, can grief be happy? And most kids will say, yes, absolutely it can. And they have the most profound answers about why grief can be happy. But I find that kids do this a little bit better than adults do. I think with adults, we have this like guilt about, yeah, experiencing joy again. And so we just want to make sure that our kids are feeling like it's okay to still feel joy. You might consider creating new family rituals or memorials. So we talked a lot about this in our last module, about rituals and memorials that you can all do together. So again, we're, as the adults, modeling that behavior, making it okay to continue to talk about the person who has died, making it okay to engage in those rituals and memorials, and then including kids in that as well. You might attend counseling, you might do a grief support group or inform your children about it. So maybe your child right now is attending our in-person grief group and you're doing this module because you're a busy caregiver, so that's great. That's giving your child an opportunity to meet other kids around his or her age that have experienced something similar. Or you might think about doing individual counseling, and allow yourself to experience your grief. So maybe it's through your emotions, maybe it's physically, intellectually, grief impacts us on so many different levels, and tend to your needs. So it's this idea that if we want our kids to know that they can experience really big feelings and still come out on the other side okay, we want to model as adults us experiencing our feelings, and then tending to our own needs. So it might be being communicative about what your grief feels like that day and what you're going to do to kind of make your grief smaller. Because then your child is seeing that you're not shying away from those emotions, you're allowing yourself to feel them, and then you're using your coping strategies to help kind of make them smaller. So that's kind of what we want for our kids. So we have to do that as adults as well. And then being honest with your kids about what you're feeling. Again, it's just setting up this environment that this is an okay and appropriate thing to talk about. And this is how we approach grief in our family, kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Okay, so next we're going to talk a little bit about the language and words to use and how to talk about death and dying with our children. And again, some of those really practical examples of ways that you can be explaining all these tough words. So first we want to just, make you very aware of all the euphemisms related to death and dying. So in the English dictionary or in the English language, there's actually over 200 euphemisms that we use to describe or to talk about death and dying. So some of these examples are, passed away, we've lost them, they're gone to heaven, or they're gone now, they went to sleep, they didn't make it. So these can all be very, very confusing for kids to understand what truly happened to this person or their loved one that has died. So, for using language like they fell asleep, or not they fell asleep, but they've gone to sleep now. Kids might be wondering, are they going to wake up? When are they going to wake up? Could this happen to me when I go to sleep? So it can just create a lot of extra fear and misconception. So it's so important with children and youth, even as adults, to use those phrases of what they are. So we like to say use the 3 Ds. So dead, dying, and died. So labeling what is actually happening with words that kids can understand. So they need clear, honest, and consistent explanations. So if you're using those words, try to encourage those people in your child's life to also use those words. Again, so, maybe grandma's using the word they passed away, or you're using the word died, someone else is using the word they're gone now. That can be very confusing. So trying to be consistent in your explanations and in the terms that you're using. So we're going to go over just a few definitions here, or not definitions, but ways that we can explain these words to kids. So died and dead. So, this means that when the body stops working, so how we would describe this is when someone dies, this means that their body has stopped working and it's not going to work again. So you can use examples such as the heart has stopped beating, the person has stopped breathing, they can't hear, they can't think, or they're not going to eat anymore. So really using physical descriptions to explain to a child what that means. So that helps children, kind of takes a little bit of those abstract thoughts about death and dying, but really explains that it means that the body has stopped working and it's not going to work again. And so kids might have some examples or some questions about, well, how are they going to eat then? Well, you can explain, well, they don't need to eat anymore. Their body, can't digest food. They're not hungry anymore. So kids sometimes worry about, how their body will function. So just explaining those in those physical terms. So grief, we explain grief to kids as all those feelings and thoughts that happen on the inside about when someone that you care about has died or is dying. So we can talk about some examples of grief. So, we like to sometimes make a whole web of experiences of grief of what kids may feel or what they've experienced. So maybe it's they haven't been able to sleep well, maybe they're feeling sad, feeling angry, maybe they have no appetite, maybe they're feeling scared, maybe they're feeling happy too. Maybe it's because like earlier it said, they're allowed to be a child in play still, right? Or maybe they're happy because their person isn't in pain anymore, or maybe they had those conversations. So let's talk about all those different experiences of grief and giving them some examples too. Cremation means, so when a dead body is put through a very high heat in a machine, which causes the body to break down into very small pieces like sand or dirt. Or you could talk about when a dead body is put into a room that gets very, very hot and the heat turns that body into ash. So again, we want to reiterate here that the person's body isn't working and that person's body can't feel anything here too. So they don't think that their person's body is going to be through a lot of pain and that they're going to feel that heat. So just really reiterating that the person's body is dead and that they're not feeling anything. And you might also want to explain what people might do with those ashes afterwards as well. So you can talk about those ashes or that sand, whatever term you want to use, about it going into maybe an urn or maybe spreading the ashes to really explain what happens after that. And suicide is another one we have lots of questions about. And do we tell the kid that the person died by suicide? This is often a really tough conversation sometimes. And so we can explain suicide to children in a way that, when a person causes their body to stop working and their body dies, this can, children might prompt or have more questions around this. So how did they cause their body to stop working? This is something that you can explore with your family and what you guys are comfortable sharing again. So you have consistent information and how you're going to explain that. But sometimes kids don't need to even go there. So I think just starting with when a person has caused their body to stop working and their body dies, sometimes is enough. We're not going to get into more detail about this, but if you have more questions about ways you can explain different ways that someone may stop their body to stop working or ways of suicide, please feel free to reach out to one of us or to a professional, and we can talk some more about that. Orly, do you have anything to add to any of those descriptions right now, or?
I probably would just say, if you do decide to have that conversation with your child about suicide, I think that there's a lot of concern just about, if I talk to my child about suicide, does that mean that they're going to be more likely to attempt, to die by suicide? And what we know is that for kids, they can handle the known. It's the unknown that they really struggle with. But absolutely, a child might be completely content with we also don't want to provide more information than what the child is asking for. So they might be totally okay if a person the person did something to make their body stop working. But that my practice is generally, if a child is old enough to ask the question, like, well, what did so-and-so do? Then they're old enough to hear the answer. And I mean, you as a caregiver have to make that decision about how much you're comfortable sharing. But we would advocate, for being honest and
Yeah, thanks, Orly. Yeah, and being honest about that cause of death being suicide.
Absolutely.
Or sick or they got in an accident. Yeah, absolutely. Some other resources or books that we wanted to let you guys know about. So When Dinosaurs Die is a great book for explaining death and dying to kids, really at many levels. So this is a more detailed book. So it does go into lots of different examples of how people die. But it's also a great one. There's lots of pictures and illustrations too. So it's good with many different ages. A terrible thing happened. So this one's a bit more generic. And so sometimes it can be used when we're talking about, a traumatic situation or an accident. but really talking about opening up that conversation about talking about this terrible thing that happens. This could be in relation to death or dying. What Happened to Daddy's Body is a great book on explaining, the death of a father. But of course, again, these books you can always, read with your kids and relate it to other losses too. Lifetimes is a beautiful way to explain death to our children. It has a little bit more of an explanation on normalizing, being alive and dying and death, and a little bit more of those abstract thoughts, but really normalizing that life cycle. And When Someone Very Special Dies is actually a really great workbook with lots of different activity sheets and explanations that you can go through with your child, there's one, I think, it's one for youth as well, orally, or this one could be good for youth too. Maybe I'm making that up, but there's a couple different versions of this workbook for different, there's one about illness, but
there's another one about, so there's, I would say they're probably more child friendly than for youth, or maybe not teens, maybe like a preteen would enjoy this. They have one that's for when someone has a very serious illness. They have another one that's called When Something Terrible Happens. That would be more like a trauma. There's one about if a member of the family has a substance use problem. But I would say they're all more kid friendly. I'm trying to think. I'll keep going and I'll ponder to see if there's a good teen one.
Yeah, I think there definitely are some other workbooks out there that we didn't mention today that are really helpful for either a child or a teen to work at their own pace or to go over together. And we always encourage you to go over these sheets and or these workbooks with them as well to talk about what comes up, or with a professional too. So we're not going to go through all the details on all these next couple slides, but I just want to highlight a few things about ways to support grieving children on this slide. So, allowing for regression is a really important one. We talked a lot about this in module 2 about behaviors and what you may see when children are grieving. So allowing for regressions, expecting regressions, and trying to maintain as much routine as possible for kids. Thinking of like some boundaries though too, and limits, and being just a bit more open and flexible with that. Including the child in mourning and talking about grief as much as possible in these conversations, of course. We talked about being consistent and checking in often. We talked about allowing safe ways for children to express what feelings they're having. And this is a really important one to remember with boundaries too. So if a child's having a big feeling and like maybe they're hitting their brothers, or they're behaving, they're acting out on some of these feelings, having those boundaries about it's okay to be upset, it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to hit your brother, or it's not okay to throw things. So, expecting and allowing and knowing that those behaviors may happen, but is setting those boundaries on them. Giving children an opportunity to be with other grieving children. Again, that normalizes a little bit more. It gives them that opportunity to express what they're going through with kids their age. So maybe it's attending a grief support group, or, if you're aware that other children have lost someone in their lives, their friends, maybe it's talking to those caregivers to, create those opportunities for, cohesion and normalizing, relating it to other kids that may be going through similar experiences. Giving choices whenever you can, giving appropriate choices. We don't want to give inappropriate choices. So allowing kids to, maybe it's celebrating a milestone or honoring someone, and it's going on this big trip somewhere. That might not be a choice that's practical, but maybe they can make choices on what to do at the funeral, or what they want to wear, or ways that they want to mourn. So ways to support grieving teens. So of course, everything that applies to children, we want to apply with kids too, but some other ways that we can support teens. So again, expecting and accepting what we call stugs or grief bursts or more mood swings. Developmentally, teens are going through so many changes. So expect that, grief may come up or, they may just respond differently to grief from day to day, week to week, and just accepting that and knowing that it may be part of development, it may be part of grief. There might be lots of different factors. Respecting what their needs are, and respecting their need for privacy is a big one too, and for confidentiality, of course. Allow for hidden feelings. We're referring to if teens aren't always expressing what emotions or big feelings are coming up for them. Allow that and respect that. unless there is that risk of harm or other high risk behaviors or things going on. So knowing that teens may be expressing or talking more with their peers and friends is very normal, and don't try not to really pull out all those big feelings from them, but sometimes knowing that those conversations might be necessary if you're really concerned or really worried, and just still be always having that open conversation and being available for them and still checking in. Supporting and respecting and understanding they probably are going to have supportive relationships with other adults too, and that's good. We encourage it. That's healthy. That's normal. We talked about answering questions truthfully. Finding peer support groups or encouraging your teens to participate in other peer support groups too is really important, or talking about these feelings and their grief with their friends, allowing more choices for teens too. And similarly to kids, you want to allow those different expressions through different outlets too, and really teens are really starting to learn more and discover more about what their interests are and their preferences, and really wanting that choice or to be involved in certain things. So really, honoring that and respecting what their wishes are. So again, we're going to end with some teachable moments. So our teachable moments area, we talk about teachable moments at the end of each of our modules, and these are just different ways that you can be continuing your grief work outside of this group with your child or with your teen. So as always, we encourage you to talk about what you've learned in group this week, or what you learned about on this watching this module. So talking about what you learned. So recognizing changes that you've noticed in your children, talking about the changes that you've noticed. Maybe it's talking about different language, or talking about death and dying in different ways maybe you've learned today, or naming feelings, or labeling some of those terms. It's okay to go back and say, I really learned this great way of explaining cremation today. I wanted to share this with you, or I learned about these videos. Can we watch them together? Talking about, you can even just talk about how you're going to try and talk more about what grief is like for you. So, and what you're experiencing. So talking about your grief, and as it comes up, start having these conversations with your child regarding those conversation tips that we talked about. Maybe try some of those reflective activity exercises we talked about. Writing down examples that may be helpful for you and when a scenario comes up, and then backtracking with your kid, right? Or reflecting them with them afterwards. You can always, talk about, I learned this, or remember that one time, or last week, you told me about this feeling, or you had a really hard time with this. I want to talk about that some more, right? You can always do that. You're natural, you're human. Notice and discuss themes of death and dying in children's books and movies and shows. I think we really talked about examples of these in our last module, or maybe in the second module. So just sharing what feelings or what scenarios that you've noticed in books or movies related to death and dying or in grief, and talking about, what those characters have expressed or shown, and what maybe you're feeling too, right? So just opening up those conversations. So we wanted to share some extra resources with you guys today also. So some of the resources we're sharing with you today are websites that you can access. So there is a couple on here about just parenting. So the Positive Discipline website has lots of resources on parenting, on different articles, as well as Sesame Street too in the community. So Sesame Street has lots of activities as well as articles and resources for parents about grief and death and dying, but it's in general. So we didn't really talk too much about managing behaviors, but we're really hoping that in a lot of what you took from today is learning that a lot of behaviors are coming from inner emotions or feelings. So always acknowledging and recognizing those feelings first. But there's some great resources from these websites that might help you with some of those more general or bigger topics. The Whole Brain Child is a book by Daniel Siegel and Dr. Tina Bryson. So it's a really great book on parenting. And Weathering the Storm is another online learning course that parents or caregivers can access for free. So it is created by the Children and Youth Grief Network, but the link here to where to access that course So it's a bit more of an extended version of kind of what our caregiver group is, but it's all online, it's self-directed. There's a word I'm looking for here and it's not coming to me, but it's very engaging. There's lots of different activities, and it's very engaging with YouTube links and reflective activities that you can be doing. So it's a great course. It's a bit longer than this one, but we encourage you to check that out if you're interested in learning more about parenting a grieving child or youth. And if you are receiving this webinar via email from us, there's some other attachments of examples of activities that we're also going to send you. So there's a worksheet on writing a letter saying goodbye to a loved one, and we have a couple other worksheets. So if you're interested in those, if you're not receiving this by email, please feel free to email us and we can send you some more resources. Just a few references that we use today, so you can always check those out. And so that wraps up our module for week 4. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. And please feel free to tune in to our last module, which is either next week if you're in group, or you can watch it at any time. And it's on self-care and self-compassion. So it'll be a really good one, again, on modeling what self-care and self-compassion looks like and really taking care of yourself while parenting a grieving child or youth. So thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.